Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. I'm Gabriella and my colleague Vicky. We're going to be presenting today's session on framing up a successful payroll replacement project. We have a large attendance today, so we're going to leave it kind of 30 odd seconds or so just as people are joining. In the meantime, for those of you that have already joined, and if you've been to some of our web meetings in the past, we do like to take questions. We'll answer those questions at the end of the session. So I'm Gabriella and Vicky. So one of us based in New Zealand and one in Australia. So welcome everyone and thanks again for your time. We're talking today about framing up a successful payroll replacement project. So Vicky, if you can pop to the next screen. So you did your business case, and some of you on the call today, you may have actually been to our conducting a successful business case webinar that we did a couple of months ago. So you've done your business case, you saw some vendors and you've selected a solution and you're all go for a project. Now, as part of that process where you were discussing your requirements, what you were after, your business drivers with vendors, you would have had a list of key things, key drivers and objectives. Might have been similar to this list, they might have been a bit more detailed, you might have had a few more high level. It is so vitally important when you're initiating your project now that you don't discard all that work that you did in getting your business case achieved, because these ultimately are what you are looking to deliver in your new payroll project. When it comes to payroll projects, excuse me, there are essentially two types of implementation methods that we see in the market. So one is a quick deploy and the other is a guided. Vendors may offer more or less of the items that we've got on those two lists there. No matter which one you follow, there are some similar processes that you will still have to undertake. One of the biggest differences with the quick deploy is that a lot of the effort actually sits with you as the customer versus a sharing approach with the vendor. So the one that we're going to talk about today is actually the guided implementation process. So a lot of what we're sharing with you is what you would expect to do and see and be involved with as part of that guided implementation process. Now this next screen, you would have seen this next screen in many forms. In planning a project for payroll, it's absolutely imperative not to discard this. Now this graph you would have seen across lots of applications, lots of business change, people, process and technology. And we'll be talking about these through the discussion today, mainly Vicky, and the impact of the data on a successful payroll project as well. We'll focus on the people you need, the roles, the importance of selecting the right people. And then when considering your project process, we'll talk about what we do now, how we do it, what we need to change. And then of course you've got that correct technology that you've decided on through the process that will underpin the people in the process, and across it, the data, how we pay our people correctly and how the data transacts that. Just going on to the next slide. One of the first things you should acknowledge and do, and it is a bit like climbing a mountain because every step seems a little bit painful, is acknowledging the risks. And in any project, it's quite good to document those and acknowledge them and start your risk register right from the very, very start, because then you will potentially get a view of some of your challenges coming up through the process. There's a few documented there. Some of those we're going to talk about, but don't be afraid of the risks, because anything you know and anything you feel could happen can be addressed through the stages of the process as long as you're prepared. And I guess finally, before I hand over to Vicky, one of our other colleagues in the office used this quote in a presentation last year, and it is really, really applicable when it comes to project planning a payroll project. A lot of the time spent up front is incredibly value. If you're not spending that time up front, it could be quite a painful process down the track. So, planning for success. This is a Fusion 5 initiative, and it's a really, really good initiative. We call it a project on a page, and we're really happy to share this with the audience today. It's usually done right at the initiation of the project, and you could do this actually with the salespeople that you've been working with to select your payroll project or payroll solution. What it does is it actually gives some very clear and simple structuring of those project elements and the outcomes that you're looking to deliver as part of that project. And it keeps it very, very focused and very visual in terms of remembering what it is you're trying to achieve through the project. So project on a page, and you can see there's lots of different headings there, incredibly value to be working on this with a common understanding across the project between the vendor and yourselves. So Vicky.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take over now and just sort of talk about some of the things that you can be doing either before you go to market, or if you've chosen your product and you're sort of getting prepared to get started, just to help the project run a little bit more successfully. The first thing I'm starting with is actually nothing about your project, but it's actually looking at what you've got and auditing what you've got. We've all heard the news across New Zealand around leave compliance, and over in Australia there's been a lot of underpayments with Fair Works. We've had to have the amnesty for superannuation guarantees just to make sure that businesses are paying people correctly as per legislation and award agreements. It's really important that you understand what issues you may have and have a plan finding a solution, because there's no point taking those issues from one system to the new system blindly. You may find you could do this via an internal audit, or you may even want to look at getting an external audit. And what I'm doing is what we're currently doing correct. One of the first things that a vendor is going to do once you've started a project is actually come on site and do some detailed requirements. We call these our discovery workshops, and then we provide you a document with advisory on using the system. It's really important that you know what your requirements are. The gathering of business requirements is pretty critical. It creates a complete set of what we're going to be setting up the system for, and enables better planning, more accurate cost estimates, shorter delivery cycles, improved customer satisfaction, and the adoption of the final product. Some of the examples I've provided on screen here just sort of show some of the ambiguity we get from the requirements. And we have customers who have put out an RFP that we've responded to, and so they'll be like, oh, well, you know what we want. We've already given you the RFP. But the RFP may say something very simple about, we want to automate leave management. And when we get into it, what do you actually mean by that? Well, before applying for leave, our employees need to be able to see those balances and actually only apply to the value of their balance. And then we might get the next customer who comes down and says, oh, I'm going to let them go 5 days into negative for this type of leave, etc. So it's actually getting right down into the detail of what you're looking for. The next slide, sorry, I've got too many things to turn over here. Also really understanding your business processes. Often a lot of the processes that you're using within your organization are either documented, or what is documented is incorrect, or they're not documented at all. In this situation, once we actually start going through the requirements, it becomes a two-step process where we're actually back engineering the existing processes to understand what you are doing. So it's something you could have a look at right up front, is how are the business processes working? Are they documented? Are we actually doing what we say we do? It's also really important to understand where your business processes have been influenced by the software you're currently using. So sometimes you're doing something in a certain way because that's a limitation of the existing tool. So again, you don't really want to bring that across if there is a better way of doing it. So just in preparation, have a think about the the inputs, the people, the rules, and the outputs that you're trying to achieve, and look at your business processes and make sure that they make sense, and also really understand what processes do you have that are showstoppers, because there will be some. The other thing that we find when you're trying to implement automated rules or automated processes within a business is quite often by automating business rules into a logical solution, it takes away ambiguity, but it also takes away that ability for people to make a decision on a case-by-case basis. And what we find when this is happening is when we get down to the discovery workshops, we can find out that there might be 4 different managers in a room and all of them are applying a rule differently. And that then takes some time to actually sit down and understand, what do you want to do? What does the award or the agreement say you should be doing? And it can expose new items or challenges that need to be worked through. Often this can even be getting a third-party legal opinion if you find out that there are a lot of things happening. So again, it's just one of those things that you can work through at any time and try and sit there and go, where we are wanting to automate something, what is everybody doing? Are we in alignment, or are we out of sync on some of these things? The other thing to think about is, who do you want on your project team? And make sure you're including the right people. A lack of access to correct subject matter experts will cost you time and often mean that the requirements aren't as detailed as they could be, and we could miss vital parts of the puzzle. So what happens often with discovery workshops is there's a project team that might do it, but they don't bring in the business people or the subject matter experts. And this can happen because people are really busy with their day-to-day work. Maybe they're just unwilling to participate, or maybe they don't want to be part of the project at all. And this should be addressed up front, because if you're wanting their knowledge, we need to get them involved and get them excited about the project. So have a look at, do you need to look at backfilling roles to make sure that your people have the time needed to commit to the project, because it can be quite time intensive. Another scenario we see sometimes is that the key subject matter experts are missing, and it's IT team or the project team. They already know what the end users want, and so they'll come to workshops without end users or without your payroll people. And again, we lack the ability to get down to detail when that happens. So I just challenge you, when you're thinking about who's going to be involved in the discovery, who do you need to include? What is their role, and why are they really important to this project? If you're going to include them, when does it make sense to include them? If you're wanting the payroll manager to come along, there's no point us scheduling workshops on payroll day, or possibly even payroll week. So it starts defining that time. Also, if you're a multiple location, where are we going to run workshops? In some ways, it's great to get people away from the day-to-day so that they're away from interruptions and they can fully commit to the process. But if you're multi-location based, is online an option? Is that something that we should be looking at? Once you've chosen the people, it's really important that you set a change mindset for the project team. Get them to embrace change, and this will help them manage the risks. And another really important thing with your project team is to celebrate the wins along the way. To keep people motivated. Projects are hard work, and so you'll want to see those little celebrations as we go through things. So, Gabriella, I'm not sure whether you were talking to this one or me.
Yeah, I was, and I particularly love that point about celebrating the wins along the way in the project, because depending on your organisation, it can be a really hard, complex, long project. And just achieving those small milestones and having a little bit of a cake or a yay because something's been configured and you've tested it, it's a really good thing. So great point, Vicky. This is just an example of what a project team, payroll project team could look like. Now, there's variations of this, and obviously we're using this from our perspective in some recent projects. It is a best of breed approach that Fusion 5 uses actually across all their applications. So at the top, you've got your steering committee. So those were the key people, the key executives generally that are invested in the project and often have to report at a board level or executive level on the success of the project. When companies are putting together the steering committee for their payroll projects, we do like to have a representation on those. It's really great to have the vendor involved. We're seeing it more and more, so it's a good thing. The steering committee might take an hour, and the vendor representation on that might only be 10 or 15 minutes. But it's great in terms of the inclusion at that high level. And then, of course, you've got your key project sponsor. Now, that sometimes is the business owner of the solution, and we do recommend change management. And you can see the vendor side. We have the senior supplier, so that's generally someone at general management or director level from the vendor organisation, and then change management offering at the vendor as well. Not all vendors offer that. It is certainly something that Fusion 5 does that adds value to the project. Communications are generally project manager to project manager. And then for yourself as customer, having those business experts, so those subject matter experts that understand what needs to be implemented and can answer all the questions around the how, the what, the why, the outcomes. You'll have your key users that need to be trained on the application, generally involved in some of the testing, and then your representatives from IT and finance, of course. Finance, always a big impact in terms of the GL that needs to be done from a payroll to your finance solution. And then, of course, your training and documentation. Now, you may be looking at this and going, there's a group of people missing from this, and this is our employees. So in this project process here, we are assuming that it's a train the trainer perspective. So your key users, your business experts, will be trained enough in the application to train your end users. And that really helps the change management within your organisation too, because they're buying into it's being trained by your company and they're seeing how you've adopted to that solution. Likewise, on the vendor side, you'll have a lead consultant generally and some testers, and testing can be as extensive as you might like it to be from the vendor perspective. So there's usually different offerings that can be added for testers. And then our data conversion team and the other consultants. So you might have a consultant for core HR and a consultant for payroll and a different consultant for attendance. But what you should have through the duration of the project, all things accepted with sick leave and people leaving, and hopefully that doesn't happen, but you should actually have the same project team right throughout the project. That continuity of people in a project is a really powerful thing.
Great, thank you. So the next thing is thinking about your project plan and really keeping this real. You know, we have a lot of organisations that want to be up and running within 3 months, and that is entirely achievable for a payroll project. Obviously, it does depend a little bit on size and complexity, but it's only achievable depending on what you as the customer can commit as well. And so we've already talked about getting the right people involved. So really understand the team. I'm not sure what my extra and is there, but sorry about that. Understand the capabilities that you've got within that team. So what are people bringing to the project, and what skills and knowledge do they actually have? With that team, understand the resource commitment. So do they have any extended leave coming up? Obviously, sickness is a little harder to plan for, but you know, any planned leave, build it into your project plan right up front, and know what that looks like. Also understand the BAU or the business as usual commitments that your payroll or your people have. We've obviously got things like tax time, end of financial year, you've got your pay weeks. There should be so many other things that, you know, if you want to get your finance person involved, don't book them for the end of the month because they're already going to be busy. So try and look at those business as usual commitments and really work through that. Also think about backfill. Are there some roles, because we want the people with the knowledge on the project, so rather than hiring temps or casual people to come in and run the project or be part of the project, sometimes that's appropriate, but we want the knowledge. But is there some backfill roles that you can do that free those people up so that they can really commit to the project? The other thing to start thinking about is data and the minefield that is data. Sorry, my phone just rang and I'm supposed to be on do not disturb, so it just upset me for a moment. The data minefield, who's going to be doing this? Data migrations are really complex and require moving and manipulating data from one system to the next. It's often not just take this piece and put it there. It may need some manipulation or some mapping along the way. If there is one aspect of the project that's going to take longer than planned, we typically find that it is data migration. And once we get into the process of extracting data from your legacy systems, it's not as easy as people thought. So just really have a think about that. Who are you going to have doing this process? Have you got people with the right skills and the right capability to pull the data out? How clean is your data? Is it really up to date? Are there areas in your business where you say, I don't really think it's quite correct? So there's no point spending time and money moving data that's incorrect to start with. You're better to have a look at it either prior to the process or as part of the process. So when you go live with your new system, everything is what you expect it to be. As I mentioned, data mapping, it's very seldom that one thing is going to go straight out of one system into the next without some level of mapping in the middle of it. So having a process and a plan for that mapping. And often the process needs to be repeated for testing, parallel runs, and then go live. So the more automated and repeatable that migration process is, the more successful it's going to be. The other thing to think about is consider the data that you want to bring across. So obviously there's some non-negotiables that you do have around employees, around pay rates, around, the organizational structure, etc. But look at things like your employee personnel information. Is it up to date? Has it been put into the system when somebody started 10 years ago and never looked at again? Have a think about that. If you suspect that it's not well maintained, maybe consider leaving that data out and having that as a capture exercise when you go live in the new system, and requiring every employee to log into the self-service and update their contact details and update their next of kin. It's a really good way of getting people to actually engage with the system and do something, as well as updating your data along the way. Also thinking about who are you going to migrate, the terminated versus current employees. Who do you need into the new system? And it may be that you have a choice, or you sit there and go, we're going to bring terminated for current financial year. It's making some of those decisions and understanding what that looks like. Historical data is another big one. Spending time, it can be a really, really costly exercise to set up positions and organizational structures in order to go back and record what somebody did 20 years ago or 10 years ago, because often your organization has changed so much that you're needing to set up structure components that no longer exist. So really think about what you need from an historical perspective. There are some non-negotiables even with history. So New Zealand, for example, we need earnings history for at least a year for the calculation of leave. So there are some of those that you're going to have to bring, but thinking about what do you really want? And if you're not going to bring historical data, which is generally the recommendation, have a think about how you're going to gain access to that post the project. So do you have options of archive licenses in your existing solution, or do you need to export that data into some sort of offline database so that you've got access to it going forward? But coming up with a plan sooner rather than later. Okay, so also thinking about testing. How are you going to test? It's important that our consultants will test as they're setting up the system. So they will do some configuration and then they will test that that configuration is doing what they expect. However, your team still need to have the confidence that everything's working as expected. Now, Gabriella also mentioned earlier that often there's test packages that are available, and absolutely there are, but you still need somebody within your organization close enough to sign that off in the end. Now, what we recommend from a testing process is that there is a user acceptance part of the project where people are going through and doing unit testing. So testing rules one by one as opposed to end to end, and just checking that things work the way you expect them to. So if I apply for leave, does that go to the correct manager for approval, and does it flow through the way it's supposed to? Generally, the UAT testing is completed by subject matter experts. They're the best people to pick up if something's not quite right. We also do integration testing. So obviously, if you have any integrations as part of your project, we want to run an integration from one test system to another test system, making sure that the integration actually runs on schedule, how it's supposed to. Is the data in the correct place? Is the data actually the correct data to be there? And is the method of transfer working for that integration? Report testing. So I am a big advocate for, instead of spending a lot of time and money customizing reports, actually test what's in the system first and then decide what you need. Because often we are using reports in our legacy systems because they are available. So trying to replicate that exact output is, again, a costly exercise when most payroll systems will have similar reports. They might look and feel slightly differently, but they generally contain the same data. So as part of your testing, you need to actually run the reports and make sure that you get the information you need as a business to keep functioning and keep carrying on. We also do parallel runs, and you'll find most payroll vendors will do parallel runs. We always recommend a minimum of 2. Some organizations want to do 3 as the minimum. That's fine. And if for any reason those parallel runs don't pass the results, then we would always recommend doing another one rather than going ahead. So I guess parallel runs, the purpose of these is to identify any differences between the pays. And so what we do is we run a pay, you're running one in your legacy system, we compare the pays, highlight any differences between the two, understand whether it's something that needs to be changed into the system you're moving to, or understand, do you have a problem in your existing system that you weren't aware of? And just sort of make sure that any discrepancies are understood before you move on to the next parallel run. Now, in addition to this, some organisations also want to do full system integration testing, and they quite often will bring in a specialist tester to do this and do, test scripts right from can I log in right through, and that's perfectly fine to bring those in as well. So thinking about testing, who's going to do your testing? So if you're asking somebody to test a system, do they actually know how to test? Do they know what is meant by go and test that this works? Do they know how to write a test script? And will they need some help framing up the testing? Because it's just really important to know that right from the outset. Even though we see a lot of the payroll people that are asked to test that have little to no testing experience, I still believe they are the ideal people to be part of the process, because they do pick up when something is not working as expected. However, if they don't know how to test, they just may need a little bit of extra time or some training or some guidance to make sure that they do know what to do when they're asked to go and test. So the next slide is what we get often in projects is comments along the lines of, but that's not what we currently see when we look at the system, or that's not currently what we do. That's not currently, the menu items we see or what we call it, anything along those lines. You've gone to market to buy a new solution for a reason. And the worst thing you could do is implement the exact same thing that you've got. People get stuck on trying to do a lift and shift, and they're not open to see what the new system can do. So again, this kind of comes back to framing up the project team. Make sure you're setting the expectation that there is going to be change, and that people need to embrace change, and focus on the output of the functionality and not necessarily the journey to get there. That being said, as I think I mentioned earlier, really understand what your showstoppers are as well, because there will be some of those. So Gabriella, just handing back over to you.
Thank you, and that's a really good segue to the change management side that we talked about earlier. So, bringing those people along the way in a least resistant way in the shortest possible time. There's an interesting fact, actually the next screen, Vicky, there's an interesting fact on change management in projects, and that's that that technology changes are only successful 33% of the time. 33% of the time. Now, we see this in payroll. We've actually seen people over the last 10 years go to market a couple of times because they've implemented a solution and for one reason or another it hasn't worked out. And I'm not saying that it's always about change management. However, change management can really help because it is going to be different, and it's about the people, the process, and the technology. So check if your vendor offers some change management assistance, because it really is a really good thing. Vicky, I'm going to miss the next slide, but if you can go to the yay we delivered.
Yep.
So finally, it's not a set and forget. The payroll environment is constantly changing. You might have different people through your payroll. You may have legislation changes. You may have employment contract changes. There are new features coming out, hopefully, and your vendor of choice, your solution of choice. And it's very easy to use those suggested things that come out in releases and upgrades. So it's not a set and forget. So when you've put your investment together for your payroll, and yes, it's a big one-off investment initially, do put a continual amount of money in your budget and following years for a health check review. Now, not necessarily every year, but maybe every couple of years, but definitely put it in your vendor, in your budget. And of course, most importantly, hopefully you have taken up the vendor's support offerings. They are really important. It's a support group going on, it's a network, it's additional training. So those are a big part of the process. Excuse me, just about to cough. But look, we are a little bit over time, and we still have everyone on the call, and that's much appreciated. We hope this was valuable. Someone did ask whether this session was being recorded, and it absolutely is. So the links will come out following the webinar so that you can reflect on this. And also, I'm very, very happy to be contacted directly if you have any other questions around what you've actually heard today. Both myself and Vicky are more than happy to answer any of your questions around a payroll project.
Absolutely.
So thank you all. We really appreciate your attendance.